Hello everyone, welcome to the AOI streams, in-depth conversations with digital artists and experts to explore how blockchain technology is impacting the future of art. AOI, also known as Art on Internet, is the movement for emerging arts and technology. I'm Federica, and today I'll be your host. In today's In Our Code Masterclass, the incredible generative artist Anna Lucia walks us through her creative process and inspirations, as well as showing us a live demo from her work.
So welcome to the In Our Code Masterclass.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So for those who are not familiar with Anna Lucia's work, she's an incredible artist. She's also an engineer. Her work is a little bit of a combination between geometric abstraction, color exploration, some references to textile art, and as of recently as I was able to talk to her about, there's some subconscious exploration as well in her work, which we'll be able to dive into during the session. So I'm very excited to have this session with her today. Let's kick off the conversation. I would love to know how you started, what's your background, how did you get into the generative art scene?
I got started with really more creative coding than generative art, I would say now almost 4 years ago already, 3.5 to 4 years. At that time, I studied engineering and I started to work as an engineer, and very quickly I was put kind of away from technical work and put more into management work, and I really was missing the technical problem solving and kind of that creativity that comes with like logical puzzles that I was so used to work with as an engineer. And I discovered processing, which is a Java library I think most people are familiar with here for creative coding. And I started to teach myself this just kind of as a hobby, to lift my spirits, to express myself creatively, but at the same time kind of challenge myself with these kind of puzzles that I would come up with. And I really didn't know what generative art was, or that it had like a whole community that existed. And how I really got started is that I decided to make an Instagram channel kind of just before January. And then I mean January the month, but also January with a G, which is actually coming up again, which is a month where for every day of the month of January, there's a creative code or generative art prompt that I stumbled upon. And I had my Instagram channel and I was doing these prompts and sharing them. And through this hashtag January, I found all these incredible other generative artists. And I kind of just found this incredible online community of all these artists that were doing the same thing. That's now 3 years ago. Yeah, because the 3rd January is coming up. That's kind of like how this whole ball got rolling and more serious over time. Yeah.
You were saying before that one thing that you were missing from the engineering side, it was resolving this kind of like puzzles, and that was kind of like the creative side of it. Have you always been like a creative person when you were a child, like growing up? How was your experience with art when you were growing up?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely not only an engineer. I've always had a very creative side as well. And it has always been, prior to discovering generative art, these kind of two sides, the mathematical engineering side and a more creative artistic side, were two very separate parts of me. And actually for a brief stint out of high school, I even went to art school for a year to explore that, and really was like, this is not for me. So I left that, went into engineering. So there were still kind of these two parts of like being artistic and having creative projects. I would take a screen printing course. I would be into analog photography. I would be writing, but nothing ever really stuck, and nothing ever really felt that it was bringing it was truly a means for me to express myself comfortably. And I think since I've discovered creative coding, that has really put things into place for me, that I found a medium that I feel I can express myself in very well as an artist.
Right. So in a way, you were trying to find that balance, right, between kind of like the rational side of engineering and the machine, and then your creative side, kind of like generative art was the solution, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But you were also referencing a lot in your work about textile art. So how did that come into your life, and how is that connected to generative art?
So actually, when I said I went to art school, I didn't study fine art. I actually went to art school to study fashion design. So that's what I did for a year. I've always been incredibly interested in fashion and making my own things out of textiles. I got my first sewing machine for my mom when I was 11 years old because she had like this really beautiful, expensive sewing machine, and she didn't want to have her 11-year-old kind of ruining that machine. So she got me this really cheap machine just from the supermarket. Like there was a kind of an advertisement at the supermarket that you could get the cheap sewing machines. She got it for me. She was like, here, you've got your own machine now. Just do whatever you want with it, like break it, like experiment. So I was always just kind of making stuff in that way with textiles. So that's kind of like my personal background with textiles, but why I find it interesting to work with as a generative artist. There's like a multitude of like layers to it. There's my personal interest and connection, but then there is like textiles are a system, which like weaving a textile, it's very systematic, which I think lends it so well for generative art, where especially with long form generative art, you're making a system. Then there is the history of like looms, which kind of are seen as the precursor to computation, or is a form of computation, and it's kind of like the precursor to our computers today. And I think another layer that is very interesting in this concept is this idea that for the longest time and still today, textiles are seen as like a craft that mostly done by women and aren't seen as at the same level of worth as the work of men or paintings, whereas, you know, textiles has always been the art or the way that women have expressed themselves, and it should be seen as art and seen as technical, you know. Also, it's a very technical craft to do. So I think like this kind of multifaceted layering of what it means, but also the interest, the symbolism, but it's also just beautiful. It's so rich and deep that, yeah, it's really something I can explore more and more.
Yeah, I love that you're referring to this, the topic of textile art having feminine connotation, so being seen like differently than other types of art. I think it's been a very interesting discussion in the art world for a long time, and I still find it surprising, but not that much after all, of how like society really influenced how we look at art, according to whether it has like a feminine or more masculine trait, you know, the value that we give to it. So I love that you take this as a sort of like, yes, you said like a symbol, like a tool. You're like, okay, this is something that previously has been seen this way, so I'm going to take it and combine it with something that is also still not seen that much as art, right? There's still people, you know, people
Yes.
being skeptical about these two things, and you're
Yeah.
like, let's put them together, right?
Yeah.
I find it very interesting whenever there's like this connection between the physical and the digital. And I was wondering, have you ever experimented with the plotter at all?
No, unfortunately, I haven't. I guess I didn't mention this in the introduction, but I live in Cairo, Egypt, and there's no plotters for sale here. I would like to get a plotter, but I've been a little bit hesitant of ordering one and then being afraid that it would get stuck at customs. When I was in New York for NYC NFT NYC. I was actually texting with somebody that I met, like a fellow artist who had a plotter, and I was like measuring my suitcase, and he was giving me the dimensions of the plotter. But then we found out that my suitcase was just too small for the plotter, and we didn't dare to take it apart, you know. So almost had one, but perhaps.
Perhaps one day. It's just because, you know, the generative artists I've been talking to, that they have like an engineering background. Most of them have experimented with this. I find it very interesting, this connection, right? So
Yeah.
hopefully one day there will be some.
Yeah. There is a fab lab close to my house with like 3D printers and laser cutters and stuff. So, but it's yeah, kind of maybe that link to making machines and such. Yeah, I definitely have that curiosity.
Mm-hmm. And kind of like connected to what we're talking about in terms of how art is valued based on, feminine or masculine traits and all that. You were telling me that you also give workshops and about generative art, like creative coding. And one thing that you found very interesting is that one of your last classes, you had like only young women, right? How was that? How did that feel? Like, how different is it from the experience that you had, for example?
It was so exciting. I was so happy to see that. So I don't, here in Egypt, like once in a while, I give workshops on generative art and creative coding, either like multiple sessions or like a one-off evening that I really enjoy doing, especially here where there's not that much awareness that this exists yet, or there's not that many things available. So kind of like put people on that path of generative art. And it was very interesting to see that my last class was just full of young women, and I was really exciting. Whereas if I see that the people like in the online community or the people that you see at events, it's usually, I would say there's like 10% are women, 15%. I hope that's going to change. Doing my best to change that as well. But
yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. The fact that you're bringing education already is incredible, and it really just, it might look like a little step, but it does make a big difference in the whole art scene for sure. And for you to be also an example for young women, to have someone to look up to and be like, I can also be there and have my space. I find it very inspiring. I would like to dive into the presentation that you have for us, your inspirations, your little demo. Yeah, let's start with the presentation. I would love to see what you have for us.
Yeah, let me share my screen. I hope this is. So today what I wanted to go through is kind of examples of my works and inspirations related to that works, and give a little bit more background to my thoughts and ideas about it, and kind of the origin stories of some of my works. Today, although like in the title that I said, I would like to talk about the meditative animation aspect. And what I would like to say about that is that I've only recently started to see in my own work is that I do a lot with animation and very meditative animations. And this hasn't been a very conscious choice of me to do. That has kind of just been something that I've been started to naturally gravitate towards and experiment with. Whereas what we previously talked about, my inspiration for textiles and to work with that has been a lot more like conscious choice, and has been a very like more directed way of doing research in my work and such. So I'll touch upon that a little bit more. Kind of one of the most direct inspirations for that has been the work of Annie Albers, which you see here. These are some of like her test fabrics and of other women of the Bauhaus movement. And what particularly struck me about their story is that there was the Bauhaus school in the 1930s, I think in Germany it was, and they allowed women to participate in the school, but most of them were kind of like nudged into the weaving workshop, even though they might have wanted to study architecture or other forms of design or classes that were taught at that school. They were kind of, told like, no, you should be doing weaving because that's a more feminine thing. And that story really struck a chord with me. And therefore, I developed an art blocks collection called Loom. And I specifically chose this example of kind of these test fabrics that you see in kind of these small works. I'm somebody who really gravitates towards small artworks, and I think they are always so precious, and it actually makes you want to look closer and lean into things instead of maybe a really big and overwhelming artwork. So that's something that I try to evoke in my Loom series. Let's see. These were kind of a work in progress for Loom that I was working with. The beginning was kind of the image on the left, where it was still very fabric-like, very organic. And I was practicing with like having it torn and the effects of that. And then I think I changed like a plus to a minus, and the image on the right emerged. And this wasn't planned for at all, but I just thought that effect was really, really cool. And I kind of rolled with that a lot, with that effect in Loom, even though it wasn't planned for. It was more of kind of a experiment or a bug that popped up. And here,
at this time, were you experimenting with this kind of color palette, or were there any other? What were you working on in terms of colors?
I think at this moment, the work in progress, I wasn't that much working with colors yet. I think I was just choosing two contrasting colors to work with to kind of really see the difference in the work. But there wasn't that much like conscious necessarily thought behind it yet. When I was really kind of like here, we're trying to work out the system. And then of course, obviously in the final Loom, there is like a lot more thought behind the color palettes. But I think what is in the Loom series, and what you can also see perhaps in the 6 images that I've chosen here, it doesn't have very strict color palettes. I think it actually has an arrangement of like 36 colors that I have different rule sets for how these 36 colors can be combined with each other to generate like different color combinations, but I don't work with like strict color palettes that can be chosen from. That's something about the colors of Loom. Yeah. And I try to do that. That's something that recurs in my work a lot, to not be like, some works do clearly have like, oh, color palette A, B, C, D, and E, and that's probably even the name for them. But in Loom, there's like a bit more going on. So yeah, while I was already working on Loom and kind of like working on that system and that very well thought out concept and such, I think while I'm working on a bigger project, I'm often also still kind of sketching on the side, kind of just experimenting, see what comes to me without a lot of thought, or yeah, just playing around. And what I did when I just joined Twitter already over a year ago now, in August, I see, of 2021, I told myself, okay, for the first 30 days I'm on Twitter, I have 0 followers. I've got to do something here. I decided to do dailies, and I gave myself 2 constraints. I could only use one specific color palette that you see here on the screen, and I could only use rectangles. I was like, great, I'm going to do this for 30 days. Got my constraints, kind of like constraints, I think help a lot with creativity. Also for people who want to like teach themselves generative art, I would say like give yourself constraints a lot. That can actually.
Talking about this, I just wanted to briefly mention, sad that Letitia's not with us right now. She has these workshops every 2 weeks where she gives this creative constraints to artists, and they have to come up with something based on those. And we really value the idea of having constraints to really enhance your creativity. So everyone who's listening in, I'm going to pass this kind of information to Letitia, to what you did, because I think it's very interesting, and you know, perhaps we can work on a workshop together on this type of constraints as well.
Yes, that will be very cool. And I'm also actually thinking about it for the January that is coming up, again, a month, even though there's the prompts, to think for myself, okay, but what are the constraints that I'm putting myself under, actually, to make it easier. So I kind of came up with this work that you see here, and it was shared in the Creative Code news that Sable Raff, he goes by on Twitter. I'm not going to butcher his French surname. It was shared in his code news, and people have made a comment, oh, it reminds me of the art that you see in subway stations. And that's kind of a concept that I started to roll with it work and developing it further. I think an inspiration for this work and for my work in general, if we start moving from kind of the Bauhaus pre-World War II to work that is more post-World War II, kind of the 60s and the 70s, the work of Bridget Riley is very inspiring to me. She was one of the kind of founders of the op art movement, or like optical art movement. In general, like more work of that movement is very inspiring to me. Kind of what I really enjoy about this work is that even though her work is static, there seems to be a lot of movement going on. You know, it feels like this work is actually moving or it's very dynamic. I think that's what I think is very inspiring about her work. And here's a work of her in black and white where you can see that even more so, that you almost see that this, you know, this wave is changing, or it's about to move. So I started rolling a little bit more with the concept of, you know, making art for a subway, and I literally made a work called Art for Subways. And I think this is the first time where this movement came into play for me. And I'm gonna find the actual, I'm gonna find the actual work here, where you actually see it moving. I hope it's not too kind of glitchy with the screen recording and such, but that you can see some of the animation. And this is the first time where this kind of popped into my work. They're just animated sine waves, but there was something about it that really, really stuck with me. And literally, it's just animated sine waves. And this is something that, since I've made this piece, has just been kind of coming back over and over in my work. So if I talk about a sine wave, I'm not sure how technical or non-technical I can be, but this is a sine wave. This doesn't go further than high school mathematics. So we've all had this. And the kind of the things that I play with are literally kind of in this formula. I play with the amplitude of a sine wave. So like how high is the wave? Like how far does it go up and down? Then another thing that I play with, so that's called the amplitude. And then another thing that I play with is the period. So kind of like how long is that wave? How stretched is that wave? And that's if you're talking about one wave. And then if I start overlaying 2 waves or 3 waves with each other, I come also in with this like phase shift. You know, maybe one wave is already up while the other wave at that point is going down, or is maybe just on its way to going down or going up. So they're not completely in sync with each other. And then of course, like the vertical shift, that they're not, you know, one wave is going up and down here and the other wave is going up and down here. And that's actually kind of just the basis of this work, Art for Subways, where it's just the sine waves. And I've made a really small and basic P5 script for it, where I just code kind of, I don't want to dive like into really the depths of the code. If people are interested, I'm really happy to like share it in the chat or share it somewhere else with people. But what's going on here is that I've drawn a sine wave of rectangles, and like the number of rectangles it's built up of at the moment is 40, but I could make it like 100, or I could make it 10. But yeah, let's leave it at 40 for now. Doesn't matter too much. And then the different things that you can play with, like I said, it's the amplitude of like, so how high is this wave? Now it's like now at the moment it's like a quarter of the wave, but like we can make it smaller. We can make it a lot bigger, like the period of the wave. So now we have exactly like one wave going on here, but you know, we could make it 3, for example. The C was the phase shift. So let's say we make this 0.2, you'll see that the wave is shifting slightly. Or D, if for example, we make this 100, it goes down, or like minus 100, it goes up. So it's really a very basic idea of just drawing these rectangles and the height of the rectangle being determined by this sine function that you see right here. So the height of the rectangles is determined by exactly the formula that I showed here. And I think the cool thing starts happening, first of all, if you start animating it. And here I'm animating it with using the frame count function of P5JS. I know that there's also, so the frame count is just a number of like which frames we are at. Like if you're at frame count number 0 or 1 or 2 or 3, I think it actually starts counting at 1. It's not an array, so 3, 4, etc. I think there's also people who use the millis, which is more like how much time has passed. I still don't know which one is better if you're making animations in P5JS. So if there's opinions about that, please let me know. The cool thing starts happening as soon as you start overlapping a lot more of actually these waves with each other. So here I'm saying I'm drawing one wave, the number of waves, and I'm making everything random, first of all, because we're doing generative art. So we're going to generate like a really random wave. We're not going to determine what's going on. So now every time I run this script, we're going to get a very different wave. And then what happens in art for subwaves and also my bigger word art for walls and public spaces is that I actually start overlapping a lot of these different waves with each other. And I started kind of experimenting so much with this technique and trying to find different constraints and different color patterns that this developed in my FX hash collection called Art for Walls and Public Spaces. There we go. There we go. So I don't know how well the animation is coming across, but what I really I rolled even more with this idea of making art for public spaces. So we went from art for subways, we went into art for walls in public spaces. So I started to imagine kind of what is that very generative, not generative, I should say, not generative, but kind of like generative art that you see on tiles at the tunnels of subway stations, or, you know, if they need to kind of make a certain public passageways look less aggressive and scary and more colorful. And I was really pondering on that idea and also this movement of these sine waves. And this is really where this work, Art for Walls in Public Spaces, was coming from. And it was really coming first from a place of experimentation and kind of just evolving in a way, working with these different sine waves. And let me see if my presentation is still going. So yeah, that was Art for Walls in public spaces. And I'm pulling up another reference of another artist that I greatly admire, Raphael Roosendaal. And this is a work that he had installed in a museum in Rotterdam called Random Fear. So it's the screen around with these beautiful gradients and broken mirrors up on the floor reflecting these gradients. And I actually saw this artwork, this installation 4 years ago when I was just starting to learn processing. So it's been an installation or an artwork that has been very kind of inspiring for me in the beginning of like, Raphael Roosendaal has been making kind of, he's one of the original net artists. He's Dutch as well, who's been making software art or art for the internet or however you want to call it. So this work was really an inspiration for me to see what is possible with software art or with generative art or making art with code. And I think a very direct inspiration or line from this artwork you can see in my work called Perpetual Oscillations, which I've also released on FX Hash, just like Art for Walls in Public Spaces. And if you really take care in this work, this is one of the outputs of Perpetual Oscillations, it's actually, again, that same idea of these sine waves determining the height of rectangles. You know, it's again this idea they are different rectangles moving at like sine waves determining maybe more the width in this case, moving at different speeds and creating this very kind of, yeah, meditative feeling of kind of just these layers going over each other constantly. And when making these works, I actually sometimes just stare at this for quite a while. And this is really what I invite other people to do, you know, when they have this work, or even, you know, or how to perceive this work, to kind of just having chilling there with you.
I have a question on that. I was thinking of your background in engineering, and we were talking before about the rationality behind that. But in this type of works, there's, you know, the element of chance as well that you can't really control. And I was wondering, is that the element that gives you this meditative state, or is that something that that you struggle with sometimes?
The element of kind of the element of randomness and surprise, you mean?
Yeah, the fact that you don't know what's gonna come out, even though, you know, in your background, like, you know, even though in your background you have this rationality in engineering, which is, you know, very straight, like, you know exactly this is going to be like that. And here there's always like this little element of chance that, you know, how do you live with that?
Very good question. I think when I'm working, when I'm sketching, when I'm exploring and experimenting, I love the randomness. It's a great source of inspiration for, you know, seeing colors next to each other that I would never put next to each other, to see new outputs. I think, no, I didn't want to show this. So there, I love the randomness, but as soon as, when it becomes nerve-wracking as a generative artist, is as soon as you've loaded your script to the platform that you're working at, and people are going to mint, and you just have no control over what's going to happen. And what I find very difficult is that at the one hand, you want to keep an element of surprise. I think for me, that's very exciting. But at the other hand, you just want to make sure that every outcome is of a certain standard. And I think where that line is and how you put that line, I've experimented with. I think if you look at Art for Walls of Public Spaces, it was a very constrained algorithm from my side. Like, not a lot of the outputs surprised me in a way. Like, I knew also that also has to do with the system of the algorithm behind it. But at the same time, I do think that every single output at Art for Walls of Public Spaces is just of a really high quality. So yeah, that's something that I struggle with. Like, where do I put the line of how loose do you let an algorithm be? Yeah.
And in the terms of the meditative state, right? When you create, do you usually create more when you're more like stressed out or nervous, or when you're more calm? Or like, do you look for that calmness in the work?
I think I create better when I'm calm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I am. And yeah, there's good days and there's bad days. Yeah, and I think I make also most of my work in the morning, just, you know, kind of before you are distracted by the day, or before the day takes you over. That's when I create most of my work.
That's interesting. That's very beautiful. We have a question as well from the Discord community. Carlos is asking, which code editor do you use for your generative art code?
I recently started using VS Code, but because I don't have a formal coding background, I started in processing, obviously just using the editor of processing, and then I started using P5 because P5 works on the web because it's JavaScript, and Java processing isn't very suitable for the web. And I literally just started working actually here in the P5 editor that I just showed you. This is where I've made most of my first NFTs. I think that's, for people who are professional coders, very hard to believe, but if you don't have a formal coding background, you just work like that. But yeah, now I'm working in VS Code, and I don't use dark mode, just FYI. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos, for the question. Let's continue.
Yeah. Something cool about perpetual oscillations that maybe not a lot of people know is that the work is actually interactive, and that the work is actually 3D. So as I'm moving around, perpetual oscillations isn't actually a 2D artwork. It just looks 2D on your screen. But it's actually a 3D artwork of these two screens that are moving in and out of each other. So what you see in the background is actually really the back of the artwork, and you have two sides of your artwork. So I can go here. This is the if you press your O, you go back to the origin, so kind of the start. But if you press your B, you get the B side or the back side of the artwork. So that's kind of
how do you choose the titles of your works?
So yeah, the art for walls of public spaces is kind of obvious, but I think the perpetual oscillations, I think, also has to do with my meditation practice, or the one that I'm kind of still building up and working with, is that there's this idea of the breath that just comes and goes, but also it's just like this perpetual idea, this, thoughts come and they go, emotions, they come and they go, and they never really stay, and nothing is ever permanent. So that's where this title came from. Yeah, just always. Yeah. So yeah, that's perpetual oscillations, and this is a very cool image of it, seeing in the forest. I think this was on a festival in Brussels, and I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful installation of the work inside nature that I wanted to share. And as you see with perpetual oscillations, I'm actually starting to work in 3D, but it's not actually really 3D yet. Like, it's 3D, but you can't see it's 3D. And with Town Square is an artwork that I start to, for the first time, actually work 3D. And I made this work in 3GS, which is a JavaScript library for if you want to work with 3D. Highly recommend to check out 3GS. And this is actually the artwork if you go to my homepage, my website, because I should be making my website. It's under construction, but as long as it's not there, you get to see this artwork. And it's again, just this idea of these sine waves kind of bouncing around and going up and down and creating this kind of endless flow that you can look at. And also this work is slightly interactive, but you can only kind of zoom in and zoom out and chill in between the rectangles or the cubes, if you like to. So this is my first artwork that is really, really 3D. And the title of this work, Town Square, actually comes from the tweet that Elon sent just before he was overtaking Twitter, where he said that Twitter should have free speech and it's, you know, it's the de facto town square. He made a comment like that, and I was just thinking about that a lot at the time of what he meant. So it's where the title of this artwork comes from. Sometimes the artwork and the title aren't necessarily immediately that connected if you look at it, but this work, Town Square, is almost, see it as like a journal entry of me at that time. Like, what was I thinking about? What was I contemplating while I was working on this piece?
I mean, at the end of the day, a title or like a piece of work generally reflects a time of your life, right? So even if they might not seem related, they still are, because that's what was going on, you know, in your brain, in your mind. And this is something beautiful that we were discussing in the call that we had before, which is that sometimes you happen to create something and you don't really quite know what it is about. And then once it's done and you kind of process it and you look at it, then you find the connections and you're like, oh, this is what I meant, and this is what was going on at that time. And, you know, that's why it makes sense that it's this way, you know?
Exactly. I think giving titles like after work is done is yeah, makes sense. So from moving from kind of my first 3D work, this is actually a VR work that I've made called This Too Will Change, kind of, again, of this idea of these perpetual oscillations of like, this too will change. This is, you know, everything is always changing. Nothing is necessarily lasting in this constant, in the same state. And this is a VR installation that I unfortunately can't really show. But if you enter this artwork in VR, if you have VR glasses, you can do that. You will be inside this artwork. You will be kind of in the middle of all these rectangles, bobbing around with a few circles. And yeah, definitely spent my own fair share of time in this with my VR goggles, just kind of chilling around.
We will share the link in our Discord after the masterclass.
Yeah, I'll do that for sure. So if you have VR glasses, go have a look at that one in the real life. So, and like, yeah, a work where I kind of finally started combining these animations and the idea of textiles is in a work called Patchwork that I've released just at the start of this summer, which is really one of my favorite works. It's very playful. It's very kind of just joyful and catchy, and it's really a work that kind of lifts me up and makes me excited. I'm going to show some live versions of it. What's cool about Patchwork is that it is dimensionless, so it's not attached to a certain like screen configuration or anything. It can just like stretch anyways, and that's also the same for perpetual oscillation. So you will see if I go full screen, it is still kind of going, and there's just kind of this like soft movement going on again, and the gradients and just happy colors. What was really cool about Patchwork is when it was released, collectors could actually kind of like press a randomizer to choose their artwork, but the randomizer was limited. I think you could press the randomizer like 5 times. So there was kind of this this element of play in it where you had to decide, okay, am I going to click another time the randomizer and hope that I get something different, or am I going to stick with what I got? I think it's really cool that if I look at the outputs of Patchwork, is that the collectors have actually chosen those outputs. So it's very interesting to see what people have chosen. I think these outputs are very cool. You almost don't see the reference to textiles anymore. It's a lot more kind of digital work. So I really love this output. This one is again just so joyful and colorful and happy, and yeah, it's a work that I really enjoy for its simplicity.
We see an exploration of colors throughout all of these works, right? Is there something, or is there a specific color you prefer the most, or a palette that you prefer the most? Like, what is your approach to this exploration?
I think for me, what is important when I'm working with colors is that, especially if you work online, it's really easy to kind of default to colors that are mostly used in UX design, which I think, there's like, okay, we have the base color and the highlight color, and these are colors not necessarily designed for art. They're colors designed for really good website design. And I kind of always try to steer away from that and build up my own color palettes. And also I think there's a tendency to, for example, only stick to 5 or 6 colors. I always, sometimes my color palettes are like 11 colors or 12 colors. So I enjoy building color palettes. Recently, I've started to tone down my colors a bit more. You'll see in like the next work that I'm sharing, but I get a lot of inspiration from fashion design, actually, because I think fashion designers are really, really good in combining colors in unexpected ways that work well. I'm always looking for kind of an unexpectedness in the color combinations. Not too
That's beautiful. We're getting some comments from the Discord chat as well. Everybody loves patchwork.
It's a really happy work, which is good to have.
It definitely is very joyful, and the way you combine not just colors but also the shapes and the rectangulars. I feel like it has something so joyful and catchy as well. It just gives good vibes to the viewer. I think it doesn't also, and I also see what you were saying before about this meditative kind of sense, right? It does, at least to me personally, it does give me a lot of like peace, like calmness, even though the colors, some of them are like quite bold, and some of them are they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of character, but somehow the combination of all of them together really gives me like a moment of calmness somehow, which I find very, very relaxing.
And I think, for example, in the one that I'm sharing now on the screen, it's really important that actually like that gray is part of the color palette to kind of just all, bring it down a little bit. Of just like, we want to have that explosion, but, bring it in a little bit. And my fourth reference that I wanted to share today of a work that is very inspiring and of an artist that I deeply admire, 2 artists actually, is Rituals by Aaron Benet and Beretta, which is not only a generative visual artwork, but also a audio artwork. Beretta is a DJ, and Aaron Benet is the generative artist for this work. And it's also beautifully animated. It's very peaceful. The music with it is very ambient, and it's an artwork a generative artwork that I really, really love, and have taken some inspiration for while working on the last artwork that I'm going to share for today, and my most recent work called Glaciations, which I made for the last Bright Moments event in Mexico City. And again, we're going to go to the live view to actually see the animation. And although less visible in this artwork, again, the animation is really just governed by a lot of sine waves, this time just like added to each other and multiplied by each other. And but I think it's making its evolution, as you would say, kind of me working with these sine waves and how you see them. And what I really enjoy about this work is just its constant motion and constantly revealing something new. And sometimes the hard edge shapes are very visible because certain colors are assembling in that point, and then at another point they suddenly disappear completely, like swept underneath like another color again, or another movement that is going on. It's almost kind of like water meandering through rocks, and it's really not something that I necessarily planned for. It's just kind of something that I discovered and found in working on this project, but really deeply enjoyed.
But I was going to say that I see some references to fashion design in this work and the one you showed before. And I see, I mean, at least myself, I see like silver elements, and I was wondering if jewelry is something that, you're interested in or you've been exploring somehow.
Not necessarily jewelry, but what I'm like starting to work with at the moment, and is already starting to appear in this work, is that I've recently started to work more with shaders, and not only P5.js or not only JavaScript. And I'm starting to work with kind of reflections and these kind of things. So yeah, I think like the reflective element is definitely starting to appear in this work.
Is there any inspiration behind wanting to create this effect, or is just a way for you to explore?
I think this well, like one of the inspirations for this work is like that I can see now is rituals. But other than that, I think it's just been something that I've discovered, along the way. So yeah, I think those were like kind of the artworks that I wanted to share for today, and how I kind of use movement in my work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a beautiful presentation. We received some really nice comments as well, so I'm very happy. Keep sharing the screen as we continue. I was going to ask you, because I know that you're on a little break right now from social media, and we're talking about how you're taking some space and you're kind of like getting inspired by different things. So how do you find your inspiration outside of the social media sphere, like outside of the different challenges that you were talking about? Is there something that you do? What are you up to in these days? Like, what are you creating? Is this something you can show us as well?
Yeah, I think it's been really healthy to step away a little bit from, especially Twitter. My Twitter timeline is only about generative art, and how even inspiring that can be. It can also be a little bit overwhelming at times. I think it's healthy to get your inspiration outside of generative art as well, and other art movements. And what I'm doing at the moment, I'm taking things slow. I'm working a lot on my balcony and with my plants. I love gardening and growing stuff, so working with that, and getting more inspiration from the city where I live again, in Cairo. I've been traveling quite a bit this year, so trying to be, especially as an outsider and as a foreigner living here, I'm trying to get like a deeper connection with the city where I live and the place where I live. So these are kind of the two main things that are on my mind, and hopefully from there becoming inspired again for new projects.
Well, very, very interesting to hear. I think this is always something that we have to keep talking about, you need a break from social media or from creation itself, you should take it, do what is good to save and to really to keep your art safe at all times, right? So I really appreciate, what you're doing right now. You're like, I've had this year, now I'm taking a little step back and reconnecting, maybe with even natural elements, like you said, like you're working with your plants. And I would be very curious to see if, in some of your next works, we see some sort of like natural, like plants elements and, and things like that.
Who knows? And I think something that also comes to mind while talking about this, gosh, did I just lose completely my train of thoughts?
It can happen.
So. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, I think, by also being able to step back, and we talked about it one-on-one already a little bit, is that because I've been stepping back, I've kind of just looked back at my work again, and actually it wasn't that clear to me that I was working this much with animation and that I had worked this much with this same type of animation. It had just been kind of this, natural process, and being able to have the space to look back on that and kind of connect that dots in my work is also, I'm working on a new project, and it's also really kind of just been a really good way to direct myself in the new thing that I'm working on.
And you were also telling me that one of the things you're doing is kind of like, you have some research questions, right? Do you have anything you can share with us, or is that like top secret based on your new work?
No, I can share about that a little bit. So especially maybe I always get very contemplative towards the end of the year, and I love making great plans for the new year's, even though they hardly come out. I think that's recognizable for many people. So I was thinking about my direction for next year and what I want to look at. And having looked back at my work, I think what I'm thinking about now, and maybe what I'm trying to discover next year, is to see like how can we use technology to actually give us more space in our life, and actually give us more pause, because often it is seen in this way of like, technology is only distracting you, it's only keeping you busy and not actually helping you to experience what is happening in the here and now, or what is really happening around you. So I'm trying to discover, okay, but how can we actually use technology to bring us maybe closer to the here and now? How can it maybe actually connect us more with nature? To see as a kind of a guidance in my work, to think about these questions.
Just because I see a little delay in the Zoom call, like in the screen sharing, I would say you can stop sharing the screen now. Let's see if it's better. Right, it should be. That's a little faster. Perfect. What was I going to say? I also completely lost the train of no, I was going to say I did really appreciate that, and I think, but that's just my prediction or like hope as well. With generative art, in the future, there will be more and more ways to reconnect it to a human form, like where we come from, and I think we will see more and more, and I hope to see that from you as well, some sort of immersive experiences through generative art for meditation, and to kind of like reconnect with your true self, and perhaps even connected to breathing exercises, or kind of like body scanning practices, all these type of works that are really, really helpful in the space that we are. Like we have a weekly space on Twitter about mindfulness and meditation, where we provide a little practice for everyone to kind of dive into and take a step back from the whole social media platform situation. And I find it incredibly important that we have this incredible technology, we have all this incredible art. We just need to find a way to merge that with our needs and with our necessities of really taking breaks sometimes. And it's probably one of the most interesting kind of questions that you brought up that I'm thinking of in these days, that a lot of people I think are trying to explore. And I think this might be like the next generation of generative art, like what is going to be exploring a lot. So I'm really look forward to see what you're going to come up with. I know that you're working, you're doing your thing, so you can't show us much, but very interesting to know what you're doing and how you're like reconnecting with nature. I find it a lot of times, like when we're talking with generative artists, most times everyone says like one of the inspirations is like, oh, nature. And then, or like I look at the sky, or like I go to the forest, or I go to the beach, you know? And I find it very, very interesting. And I love to find that connection that's like human with something that is so allegedly machine-based, right? So it's very powerful.
Whereas I think a lot of either the algorithms that generative artists use are literally simulations of natural processes, or they are algorithms that have been invented to find ways that we can visualize things in nature, like noise, you know, that exists just because we want to make beautiful mountains and to, you know, create these natural textures. So it's, yeah, you just come back to it again to, you know, where you come from, you're like, coming back to it. Yeah.
What do you see in just to kind of conclude our conversation, I'd love to know, what do you see in the future of generative art in the next like 5 years?
5 years, I think generative art is going to be a lot more present in our lives. I think there's going to be kind of I think generative art is hopefully going to make like more waves in the traditional art world, but I don't think it's only going to stay within the art world. I think there's also we're going to see a lot more generative art, applied generative art, like to design, to advertisement. You know, I can totally see collaborations with fashion designers coming up, with other type of designers. I think, you know, where it's like 2 years ago, I had to explain what I do. I think 5 years from now, I really don't have to explain people anymore what generative art is. That more into like the broad strokes. What I think something that a lot of generative artists also do have to kind of maybe struggle with a little bit, and this is a question for myself as well, with the rise of AI, and AI also being able to code and make images, what is our role as generative artists? Because before, maybe as generative artists, you could say, look, I can generate 1,000 images just from like the code that I made, or look, I can make art with the computer. But that question has been answered now, or that point has been received. Like, yes, the computer can make art, or, you know, can generate 1,000 of images. So I think as generative artists, we have to start going different questions. And I think to go on a little bit more about this point is that maybe now a lot of generative art looks like each other, but I think a lot of artists are gonna still make generative art, but are start going down a lot more their personal journey. You know, I think we're coming from a place where we were very as a collective of generative artists and a community, and that's going to remain. But I think a lot of us are going to start exploring our own personal journeys a lot more.
I think the topic of AI in generative art, but also art in general, is super important to have. But I always have, I'm of the opinion that AI is a tool, and even if in 5-10 years or whatever time, you know, you will be able to see like a generative piece made by AI and be like, oh, there's no one behind this. There's always going to be someone behind this, but most importantly, I think there's always going to be someone in front of it to judge it and to experience the emotions, right? So I think that ultimately, well, this is a big topic. We should definitely have a space about this, but like we had a space like the last season about AI art, but I think we have to talk about this so much more. But you know, ultimately, there's always going to be our emotions and our feelings in front of a piece of art. So the human element, I don't think it's going to go away, but I think it will be adjusted and it will have perhaps a different role. Even in terms of like AI, like whoever codes the AI itself will be behind this. There's always this like human connection behind, but I totally see what you mean, and it will become like a challenge, or even in a positive way. I think it will become something which generative artists are going to be like, okay, what are we going to do now? Like, where should we explore? What kind of tools should we use? So,
and I think, concepts or like the conceptual ideas behind artworks are going to become a lot more important in generative art. Which, I think the technique, what I've seen in the last year or 2 years in terms of technique of what I've been seen done with code has been super impressive, but at some point you're like, okay, so that's been done. Okay, we've been impressed by your technicalities. And now, also with AI, in the end, it's still the concept that is so important.
Yeah, and that's why, with this masterclasses, we really try to show the technical part, but also talk a lot about the concepts behind it. Kind of like, reconnecting with the human part of this art that still sometimes looked down to, and it deserves much more value from the traditional art scene. So, the type of the goals that we have with this class is really to reconnect it. And I totally agree with you. It's going to become more and more about what's behind it. And a lot of people are going to be asking more questions about the why. Why did you make this, right? Rather than how. I guess it's just gonna have this shift, but it's still gonna be interesting to explore the different perceptions and what people see in a piece of art. So you raise a really good point. We should definitely have a Twitter space about this very soon. In January, we're going to talk about this again.
Yes, exactly.
But it was so nice to have you, and thank you so much for taking the time. It's been wonderful. Your work is absolutely lovely, and you are such an inspiration for generative artists in the space. And thanks everyone in the audience as well who was with us in the Discord channel. So thanks everyone again. Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the AOI streams. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and subscribe to listen to more stories from the pioneers of the ecosystem.